The town of Red Hollow was the kind of place where nothing surprised anyone anymore. Dust ruled the streets, silence filled the gaps between words, and people learned quickly not to ask questions they didn't want answers to. That's why when word spread that Thomas Hale had sent for a mail-order bride, no one reacted with excitement, only quiet curiosity. Thomas wasn't the kind of man people imagine with a wife. He kept to himself, worked his land hard, and spoke only when necessary. Some said he had always been that way. Others said something had made him that way. Either way, no one expected much from the woman who would arrive, least of all Thomas himself. He stood near the edge of the small train platform, his hat low, his expression unreadable as the distant sound of the train echoed through the valley. His hands rested calmly at his sides, though there was a tension in his posture that didn't quite match the stillness of his face. He had written the letter weeks ago, short, direct, no promises, no lies. Just the truth as he saw it. A ranch that needed running, a life that was quiet, a man who wasn't good with words but would keep his word once given. He hadn't expected a reply, and when it came, he hadn't expected her to actually show up. The train whistle cut through the air, louder now, pulling him back to the moment. People gathered loosely around the platform, some pretending they weren't watching, others not bothering to hide it at all. The train rolled in slowly, metal grinding against metal as it came to a stop. Doors opened. A few passengers stepped down, travelers, workers, no one of importance to anyone else. Then, she appeared. At first, Thomas didn't move, didn't react. He simply watched as a woman stepped down from the train, her posture straight, her movements calm but deliberate. She wasn't what he expected, not even close. Her dress, though simple, was clean and well-fitted. Her hair was pinned neatly, though a few loose strands moved gently with the breeze. But it wasn't her appearance that made him pause. It was the way she carried herself, confident, aware, like she didn't need the town's approval to stand there. Her eyes scanned the platform once, quick, sharp, and then settled on him. Not by accident, like she already knew. Thomas felt something shift in his chest, subtle but undeniable. She walked toward him without hesitation, each step steady against the wooden boards. The quiet murmurs of the crowd faded slightly, attention narrowing to the two of them. When she stopped in front of him, there was no nervous smile, no shy hesitation, just calm certainty. "Thomas Hale," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was clear, steady, carrying just enough strength to hold its ground. He nodded once. "Yeah." A brief silence followed. Then she extended her hand. "Clara Bennett." Thomas looked at her hand for a second longer than necessary before taking it. Her grip was firm, not delicate, not uncertain. It caught him off guard in a way he didn't expect. He released her hand slowly, his gaze lingering on her face. "You came," he said, as if he was still trying to confirm it. Clara raised an eyebrow slightly. "You wrote," she replied. There was a faint edge of something in her tone, not sharp, not rude, just honest. A few people nearby chuckled quietly, but quickly stopped when Thomas glanced their way. He turned back to her. "Long trip?" he asked. "Long enough," she said. Another pause. This one felt different. Not awkward, just unfamiliar. Thomas cleared his throat slightly. "I've got a wagon," he said. "Ranch isn't far." Clara nodded once. "Lead the way." No questions, no hesitation, just trust, or something close to it. Thomas turned, starting toward the edge of town where his wagon was tied. He didn't check if she was following, but he knew she was. He could hear her steps behind him, steady and unhurried. The town watched them go, whispers picking up once they were far enough away. "She doesn't look like the quiet type," someone muttered. "Thomas doesn't look like the talking type," another replied. Neither of them heard, or if they did, they didn't care. The ride out of town was quiet at first. The wheels creaked against the dirt road. The the horse moving at a steady pace as the buildings of Red Hollow faded behind them. Clara sat beside him, her posture relaxed but alert, her eyes taking in everything, the land, the distance, the silence. "You always this talkative?" she asked after a while. Thomas glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. "Depends who I'm talking to." She nodded slightly, as if accepting that answer for now. "And me?" she pressed. He considered that. "Not sure yet," he said honestly. Clara's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, but close enough to notice. "Fair enough." Silence returned, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like something waiting. "Your letter," she said after a moment. "You didn't say much." "Didn't see the point," he replied. "People usually try to make things sound better than they are." Clara looked out across the open land, the wind brushing lightly against her face. "And you didn't?" "No," he said. "I figured if someone still came after that, they'd know what they were getting into." She turned her head slightly, studying him. "And what exactly am I getting into?" Thomas didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the road ahead, his expression unreadable. "Work," he said finally. "Quiet. No promises beyond that." Clara held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then she nodded slowly. "Good," she said. That caught his attention. He looked at her properly this time. "Good?" She met his eyes without hesitation. "I didn't come here for promises," she said. "I came here for something real." The words settled between them, heavier than anything else they had said so far. Thomas didn't respond immediately, but something in his expression shifted, just slightly, enough to notice. The ranch came into view as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. It wasn't much, a small house, a barn, land that stretched far but showed the signs of hard work rather than comfort. Clara took it in quietly, her gaze moving over every detail. Thomas slowed the wagon to a stop. "This is it," he said. Clara climbed down without waiting for help, her boots hitting the ground with quiet confidence. She walked a few steps forward, turning slowly as she looked around. There was no disappointment on her face, no hesitation, just assessment. "It'll do," she said. Thomas blinked slightly. "It'll do?" She turned back to him, that same almost smile touching her lips. "I've seen worse," she replied. He let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Something about her response, about her, wasn't fitting into the expectations he had built in his mind, and he wasn't sure what to make of that yet. Clara stepped toward the house, her hand brushing lightly against the wooden door before pushing it open. The inside was simple, clean, but empty in a way that spoke of routine rather than living. She stepped inside without asking, her eyes moving across the space quickly, taking in everything. Thomas followed a second later, watching her as she moved through the room like she already belonged there. "You always invite yourself in?" he asked. Clara glanced back at him. "You brought me here," she said. "I assumed that counted." He couldn't argue with that. She moved toward the table, setting down the small bag she carried. Then she turned to face him fully. And for the first time, there was something different in her expression. Not just confidence, something deeper, something sharper. "Let's be clear about something," she said. Her voice was still calm, but there was weight behind it now. Thomas straightened slightly, instinctively aware that this moment mattered. "I didn't come here to be silent," Clara continued, "and I didn't come here to be told where I stand." The air shifted. Subtle, but real. Thomas didn't interrupt, didn't argue. He just listened. Clara took one step closer, her gaze locked on his. "If I'm staying," she said quietly, "it won't be as something you ordered." The words hung between them, heavier than anything else she had said so far. And in that moment, Thomas realized something he hadn't expected when he sent that letter. This woman was nothing like what he had imagined. And somehow, That was exactly why he couldn't look away. The words she had just spoken didn't echo, they settled. Heavy, real, the kind that didn't fade just because silence followed. Thomas stood where he was, his eyes fixed on Clara, studying her like he was trying to understand something that didn't fit into the life he had built. Most people avoided confrontation, especially in a place like this, especially in a situation like theirs. But she didn't. She stood there, steady and certain, as if she had already decided who she was long before stepping off that train, and wasn't about to let anyone change it. "Then what are you here as?" Thomas asked finally. His voice wasn't harsh. It was honest. Clara didn't hesitate. "Someone who chose to be here," she replied. The answer came without pause, without doubt. It shifted something again. Because choice wasn't something Thomas was used to hearing in matters like this. He nodded slowly, taking that in. "All right," he said. It wasn't agreement to everything, but it was enough for now. Clara watched him closely, as if measuring the weight of that response. Then slowly she relaxed just a fraction. Not fully, but enough to show she had heard him too. The tension in the room eased, not gone, but changing. "Good," she said quietly. Silence returned, but it felt different now. Less like distance, more like something beginning. Thomas moved first, stepping past her toward the small window, glancing outside as the last light of day stretched across the land. "It'll be dark soon," he said. "You should rest." Clara turned slightly, her gaze following his. "I didn't come all this way to sleep through my first night," she replied. There was a faint trace of something lighter in her tone now. Not quite humor, but close. Thomas glanced back at her. "Then what did you come for?" She met his eyes again, holding them. "To see if this place can be something more than just land," she said. The words were simple, but they carried intention. Thomas didn't answer right away, because he didn't have one. Instead, he turned slightly, moving toward the small shelf near the wall. "There's water out back," he said, "if you want to wash up." Clara nodded. "I do." She stepped past him, heading toward the door without waiting for further direction. He watched her go for a second, then looked away, exhaling slowly. This wasn't what he expected, not even close. And yet, something about it didn't feel wrong. Outside, the air had cooled, the last traces of sunlight fading into a quiet evening. Clara stepped around the side of the house, finding the water basin he had mentioned. She paused there for a moment, her hands resting lightly on the edge as she looked out across the open land. It was vast, quiet, almost too quiet, but not empty, not like the places she had left behind. She dipped her hands into the cool water, letting it run over her fingers, grounding herself in the moment. This was real, all of it, the journey, the man, the choice. Behind her, the door creaked softly as Thomas stepped outside. He didn't come too close, didn't interrupt. He simply stood there for a moment, watching the horizon like she had been. "You always this sure of yourself?" he asked after a while. Clara didn't turn. "No," she said, "just when it matters." That made him pause. "And this matters?" She finally glanced back at him, her expression calm but clear. "Doesn't it?" The question hung between them, simple but direct. Thomas didn't answer immediately, because he wasn't used to thinking of things that way. Most of his life had been about surviving, working, getting through one day to the next, not about whether something mattered. But standing there, with her, he wasn't so sure anymore. "Maybe," he said. Clara studied him for a second longer, then nodded faintly before turning back to the water. She finished washing her hands and face, the coolness helping to clear the dust of travel and the weight of the journey. When she stood straight again, she looked different. Not softer, not weaker, just more present. She walked back toward the cabin, passing him without a word. Thomas followed a moment later. Inside, the room felt warmer now, the fire casting soft light across the wooden walls. Clara moved toward the table, adjusting her bag slightly before sitting down. "So," she said, looking up at him, "how does this work?" Thomas leaned lightly against the wall, folding his arms. "Work? This arrangement," she clarified. "You wrote for a wife." I answered, "Now we're here." There was no discomfort in her tone, just clarity. Thomas considered his words carefully. "I figured we'd take it one day at a time," he said. Clara tilted her head slightly. "That's not much of a plan." "It's the only kind I know," he replied. She held his gaze for a moment. Then slowly she nodded. "All right," she said, "one day at a time." The agreement felt simple, but it carried more weight than either of them said out loud. The night settled around them quietly after that. No sudden changes, no forced closeness, just shared space, shared silence, and something slowly forming between them that neither of them rushed to define. Clara took the bed without argument, not because she expected it, but because Thomas offered it without hesitation. He took the chair near the wall, like it was the most natural thing in the world. At some point the fire burned low, the room dimmed, and sleep came, slow but steady. Morning arrived with soft light spilling through the window. Clara woke first, her eyes opening to a space that still felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. She sat up slowly, taking in the room again, grounding herself in where she was. Then she noticed him. Thomas was already awake, standing near the door, his hat in his hands as if he had been about to leave. He looked back when he heard her move. "Morning," he said. Clara studied him for a moment before responding. "You always up this early?" "Work doesn't wait," he replied. She nodded slightly, then swung her legs off the bed, standing. "Neither do I," she said. He raised an eyebrow faintly. "You planning to work?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "I didn't come here to sit around." There was no challenge in her tone, just truth. Thomas watched her for a moment. Then slowly something shifted in his expression. Not surprise this time, something closer to acceptance. "All right," he said. "We start with the barn." Clara gave a small nod. "Lead the way." He opened the door, stepping outside into the fresh morning air. She followed without hesitation, the light catching in her eyes as she stepped onto the land that would now be part of her life. And as they walked side by side toward the barn, something settled between them. Not understanding, not yet, but something just as important: respect. Because this time, he hadn't received the quiet bride he expected. He had found someone who stood beside him instead. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas realized that might be exactly what he needed.